Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Oh my God, Tim! What is that? What is that sound? And that awful pressure. It's pushing me to the ground. Ah, my goodness! I can't get up. I can't move. I'm out here near Stonehenge, and there's a big flap going on. It's that awful thing. It's a thing in the sky over Warminster. Oh my goodness, Tim, they're gonna get us yet one of these days. Oh, hi, Tim.
You're now going to be made into a crop circle, Tim.
Well,
the official Tim Beckley crop circle.
Well, we're going to be talking a lot about Stonehenge and ley lines tonight and dowsing. And I had a very remarkable experience back in the early 1980s in the town of Warminster with, well, some people called it the Thing. And it had first started on Christmas morning when this this lady, was on her way to church. And she heard this like sound in the sky, she said 1,000 bees, and she was thrown to the ground, and she couldn't get up. And later that day, it turned out that several people had seen this UFO in the sky, and they called it the Thing. Now, I was invited by my friend, the late Earl of Clancarty, Brinsley Laporte Trench, to give a little impromptu off-the-record talk at the House of Lords, unofficial UFO group. And after I spent the day at the House of Lords and the evening with the Brinsley Laporte Trench, I decided to take a train out to Stonehenge because it is a major attraction, of course, and anybody who's into Fortean phenomena and metaphysics and UFOs and all certainly has to spend at least one afternoon there. And after visiting Stonehenge, I decided to check in with my main bud, a fellow by the name of Arthur Shuttlewood, whose book, UFO Prophecy, Tim, we had published here in the United States. Mm-hmm. And he was the editor of the local daily newspaper, the Warminster Journal. And he had started out as a skeptic as far as UFOs go, but in the short period of time, with all the eyewitness testimony he was privy to, he began to realize that people were indeed seeing and hearing something very strange over this town. So I went out there to visit with him. We had Indian food for dinner and joined up with Arthur Bob Strong, who was the retired RAF pilot who had taken dozens and dozens of photographs. He had a great scrapbook full of just pictures of all kinds of weird things in the sky. You talk about strange phenomena. Well, this was everything from a giant bat to a freight train going by. He would mount the telescope on the hood of his car and sit out there till after midnight, taking all these photographs, and some of them were very remarkable. Unfortunately, most of his photographs were borrowed and never returned. So when he did show me his scrapbook, it was half empty at that point. But we did manage to publish a few of his photographs in this updated edition of UFO Prophecy that we just came out with less than a year ago. Anyway, with Arthur Shuttlewood at my side, we saw this object in the sky that looked kind of like what would you call it? A lit globe, except it was small. I mean, it wasn't that it wasn't that close. But Arthur thought that it was one of them. It was one of these intelligent objects that had even landed on several occasions in the field there. So he said, "Let's see what happens if we flash a a torchlight, a giant flashlight at it, see if the object will respond. Well, sure enough, he hands me this flashlight, and I start blinking. No Morse code or anything, but blink, blink, blink. And every time I would blink the light at it, it would seem to respond in some sort of intelligent manner, almost as if it knew what we were doing. I mean, obviously, it had seen our signaling. So that's the one night I do believe that I can actually say in earnest that I did communicate with a UFO, whatever a UFO might be. In fact, I know there are many people, of course, in the town of Warminster there who thought that they were being visited by spaceships, but there are other opinions, and I know that both Dr. Greg Little and myself don't necessarily accept the ETH hypothesis. We think that they are more paranormal or psychic in design. And so we're going to get into that tonight, Tim. And I guess you've been interested in the ley lines and dowsing and all these ancient monuments and all for quite a while yourself.
Oh yes, for a long time. The whole idea of dowsing has been fascinating to me, and I'll tell you this quick story because I know we want to get to our guests. But earlier this year, the people who live across the street from me had put in a swimming pool, and they had trouble with drainage. They were trying to locate an older drainage pipe that ran from the back of their yard and then through their front yard and then finally into the water system under the street. They couldn't locate it, and so they hired local contractors to try to find it. And I was sitting in my office one day, and I was watching these guys, and they came out, and they brought out like their metal detectors and all that, and they were going back and forth in the yard, which I wouldn't think they'd be able to find anything because most of the pipes around here are either like plastic or tile, not metal. Well, sure enough, they couldn't find anything. Well, then one of them got into the back of his truck and he brought out L rods. Now, if anybody is familiar with dowsing, L rods, I mean, that's what they look like. They look like two pieces of metal that are bent in the shape of an L.
Get yourself a damn couple of coat hangers, and it's the same thing. I've done it myself.
These things, I mean, he had them in a really nice box. And I mean, he brought them out. They had handles, on them, and obviously, I mean, fairly expensive of L rods. And he got them out, started walking back and forth across the yard for these things, and they crisscrossed at various locations. He marked where they crossed each other, and they set to digging. Sure enough, they found the pipe in just a matter of 10 minutes. When they had been out there earlier with all kinds of modern equipment, couldn't find anything for a couple of hours.
Well, so, my old friend Uri Geller became a millionaire by doing a little bit of dowsing. I understand that he was hired by a company that was looking for oil in one particular area, and he got out a map and a pendulum and did a little bit of dowsing and located the place for them to drill. And they found the oil, and he became part of the got his gratuity on it. He made some money on it, and
he's made a lot of money for doing that, as far as from what I understand.
I hear you. But let us get into the our guest of the evening. Why don't you tell everybody who we're going to be talking with?
Oh, sure. It'd be my pleasure. Well, we have with us tonight Maria Wheatley. Maria is a second-generation dowser who is a leading authority on the geodetic system of Earth energies. She's taught how to decode and divine the lands by her late father, Dennis Wheatley, who is considered to be one of the UK's top master dowsers. Now, Maria leads sacred site tours and dowsing tours, small groups, privates, 1-to-1 or larger groups. They're all welcome to sites such as Stonehenge, Avebury, Glastonbury, Ireland, Scotland, France, and Prague. Now, Maria is also an accomplished author of books on sacred sites and dowsing. And using dowsing, Maria discovered the elongated skulls of Stonehenge, which led to the remarkable untold story of Stonehenge and the Neolithic High Queen.
We got to find out about that, Mike.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, now, as well, Maria wrote a book about that, The Elongated Skulls of Stonehenge, Divining Ancient Sites, Insights into Their Creation, and Sun, Moon, and Earth Energies. Now, with us tonight also is Dr. Greg Little. Now, Dr. Little, is a psychologist specializing in the treatment of criminal populations, and his programs are in use in all 50 states and in 9 countries. He's also the author or co-author of over 60 books and over 1,000 articles. Now, for nearly 40 years, he has investigated UFO theories, ancient mound cultures, Native American rituals and death beliefs, and is the author of the Illustrated Encyclopedia of Native American Indian Mounds and Earthworks, Path of Souls, and he's also been on hundreds of radio shows and has been featured in numerous documentaries. Now, I should point out that him and his wife, Dr. Laura Little, actively searched the Bahamas for crashed planes and archaeological ruins that might be linked to Atlantis. And I should point out that Dr. Little also wrote the book People of the Web, which is one of my favorite books. I've got probably a first edition copy in my library here. And I tell you that I think that came out in 1990, and that's always been one of my go-to books. So, Maria, Dr. Little, thank you very much for being with us tonight on Exploring the Bizarre.
Well, Tim, my head is beginning to expand. So I think in that case, we'll begin with Maria over there in the UK, since she's done research on elongated skulls. But Maria, how are you doing this evening?
Yeah, it's quite early in the morning here in the UK, but I'm doing just fine. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, love to just talk with you here for the next couple of hours. Where are you exactly located?
I'm located in a small market town dating back to the 12th century called Marlborough, which is quite close to Avebury, which contains the largest stone circle in the world, and about sort of 15 miles or so from Stonehenge.
So on a clear night, you could almost see the tall stones there. Huh?
If I jumped up and down a bit.
But so it was your father who started to investigate. Now, what year would that have been that your dad got into this?
That was quite some time ago, actually now. And what I've done since being sort of shown how to dowse all those years ago is to try and look more, to use dowsing to find things like Leys and Stonehenge, but also to try and back that up with some kind of, scientific observation and recordings as well. So I've teamed up with people like Rodney Hale and David Webb to try and, prove that these energies exist. So I've tried to kind of take it further and present findings on the ancient landscape and places like Stonehenge.
Well, there may actually be some people in our audience who don't know what a ley line is. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the history? Because as I understand it, it all kind of started, around 1920 or so, when a gentleman with a dowsing rod went out and realized that there were certain energies that were abundant in certain places, and they were all on a straight line.
That's right. I mean, the grandfather of leys, or ley lines, as you say in the States, ley actually means line here, began with Alfred Watkins in about the 1920s. But my research has dated it back much, much further to a magician over here in the Elizabethan period called Dr. John Dee. And he was
yes, one of my favorite personalities in the occult.
Certainly is. And he reported in one of his publications that there were immortal lines in the landscape. He was actually describing lays long before Alfred Watkins. And again, prior to Alfred Watkins, you had other antiquarian authors, such as the Reverend Edward Duke, who was also describing straight alignments in the landscape. So what's a lay, as you said? A lay is literally a line of force. Sometimes they can have energy, these straight lines, sometimes they don't. So sometimes they're called topographical lays. That's just an alignment with a minimum of 5 sites sited upon it. Some lays can be really short. They can be just a mile or a couple of miles long. And some lays can be extraordinarily long, like 300 miles long is quite a long lay in the UK. And some of them go right the way around the world and become great circles, and some lays can be parts of grid systems. So they're quite complex. Some lays can be aligned to an astronomical event, for example, like the rising sun at Beltane, thus May the 1st in the ancient pagan calendar. So that led authors such as John Michell in the 60s to suggest that some lays were actually man-made and orientated to face astronomical events.
So now, I know that there are all types of different techniques for dowsing, as Tim mentioned. Uri Geller using the pendulum, and L rods, and going as far back as people using the forked stick. Do you have a favorite method?
Yeah, my favourite method is actually using an L rod. I think it's quite simple, very easy to use. So I use a copper and nickel-based L rod with sleeves, sort of handles on them. It's really easy to use, and you can use just one rod these days. A lot of professional dowsers in the UK just have the one rod, and you can employ methods like directional dowsing, asking the L rod to show you the direction of a given object or target. So it's really easy to use, and anyone and everyone can dowse. It's really easy to apply.
When you were learning to do this, I mean, did you find that you were a natural at it, or did it take you some time to actually, find your force, so to speak?
Well, it's like anything, any skill or art. If you practice it, you become adept. So I think with a little bit of practice, anyone and everyone can dowse. So I think, yes, you do have naturals, but, it's a skill that can be taught and applied. So, I mean, I teach across Skype, I teach online courses, and people easily grasp this ancient art, not just to find water or pipes, as you were describing earlier, but to decode their house, to see how their houses are energetically, whether they're good or negative places to live.
I know a lady who is she's a chiropractor by profession, and she has a technique where she actually will rock back and forth. And I'm not quite sure just exactly, how she does this, but she says when she gets some resistance, and I'm not quite sure what she means by resistance when she rocks back and forth. Yeah, I mean, it's similar to the technique where I've seen people where they will rub a surface where they're, like dowsing, and then when they get a stick, they've hit upon the correct answer. I mean, there seems to be almost as many techniques as there are people out there. Now, when you describe earth energies and being able to detect them, do you think that this is something that the ancients did, either with techniques like we've been talking about, or maybe just with this with a natural ability just to be able to detect these things? I mean, do you think that our ancestors knew about these earth energies and lines of force and made use of them?
Yes, I do. I think they were fully aware of the energetic ley system. I think they were fully aware of different types of earth energies. Some earth energies are generated by deep underground water produced independently by the earth, for example, and that produces a huge spiral pattern called a geospiral. That seems to represent like the esoteric center of an ancient site like Stonehenge. So if we imagine deep, deep, deep down in the ground, large pools or lakes of water created by the earth herself rather than from rainfall, then that produces a huge energy field. And it seems to be that's what the ancients were looking for. And when we've done recordings using equipment over these geospiral energy places, it seems that they're around about sort of 7 to 11 hertz, which is equivalent to our alpha brain and the Schumann resonance of the Earth. So yes, that's what I think. I think they were looking for these highly energetic places, and when you place a standing stone into this energy field, that stone seems to absorb the energy and starts to transmit it across the land itself. And again, we've done experiments to prove megalithic energy. So it's a huge system that the ancients were tapping into.
So these megalithic structures, they're not just scattered haphazardly across the landscape. They've been deliberately placed in specific locations.
Yes, they were marking deep underground aquifers. They were marking also earth energies. So earth energies, if we visualize a ley system, for example, that's a long straight ley alignment that sometimes has earth energies, a male and female current entwining it in a caduceus style manner. That's a ley system. And one of the first ley systems were discovered by the late Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst, a wonderful dowser, and Hamish forwarded one of my books. The ancients were looking for those as well. And in ancient China, these were documented in a system called Feng Shui as white tiger and green dragon, for example. They personified them as animals. So this system has been known to ancient man for thousands and thousands of years. And I think this is what Dr. John Dee became aware of, because when he wrote about the ley systems, he said it gives a magician or a person a power in both their words and in their works. So John Dee realized if you're in the right place, you can tap into this energy system, because a lot of people today feel that it's sentient and conscious and can interact with your own consciousness.
I know author Colin Wilson, in one of his books, wrote about how he and his wife had attempted dowsing megalithic structures. I can't remember which one specifically he had referred to, but he said one of them, and he felt that the energies coming out of it were almost like spiraling out. Was the perception that he had. Well, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to finish my question. The next segment, because we are coming to the end of this part of Exploring the Bizarre. When we come back, we'll bring in Dr. Greg Little to the conversation and continuing to talk about earth energies, and hopefully Dr. Little will be able to talk more about Atlantis and possibly the connection between the ancient mountain builders of North America. So stay tuned for more.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. And Maria, I need to finish my question real quick about the late author Colin Wilson. who he was said in one of his books that him and his wife had tried some dowsing, and he wasn't very good at it, but his wife was really good. But he said that he tried dowsing one megalith, and he felt almost like an electric shock coming from it, and actually felt sick to his stomach and had to get away from it and sit down for a little while. So are these structures still energetic? They're still active after all of these, thousands of years, if not more.
Yes, they are. But as long as they're still rooted into either the lays or the earth energies or the electromagnetic emissions from underground water, yes, they are very active, and they seem to have particular points on the stone that are more active, and this is what Rodney Hale and myself looked into. They're like energy bands, if you will, that kind of wrap around the stone, spiral around the stone, and it is these points that are really powerful, and very sensitive people can feel them as like a tingling sensation, or sometimes one dowser, master dowser called Tom Lethbridge, for example, when he was dowsing the Merry Maiden stone circle in Cornwall, he felt the stone started to rock and to move, and that made him feel very sort of unbalanced for a while. And some sensitive people can feel the energies.
Well, how big was the stone?
The Merry Maiden stones in Cornwall are probably, they're large granite dress blocks, about sort of 6 feet high.
And it was moving?
He reported it in one of his books. Yes, he felt it was kind of like rocking. That's how he describes it. And he was using a pendulum to dowse over the top, and he was a long cord pendulum dowser. He was the father of long cord pendulum dowsing, which uses the rate of something like 26.5 inches pendulum cord, or a harmonic of that, a subdivision of that, could find underground water. That's what he was a master dowser of.
Hey, how about the figures on Easter Island? Are they tied in with this?
Any stone that is put into the earth energy system will behave in a particular manner. Yes, it makes them kind of come alive with energy.
I was going to say, I was in Tahiti, and there was this woman who was doing airbrush, like a tapestry, and she would have them hanging outside her place. You'd buy one, and I have one here of this. I guess ancient astronaut scene of the one of the gods from Easter Island, the stone figures, carting off a very attractive woman. I mean, it's a kind of a bizarre piece of tapestry, but it takes up half of my living room wall. I mean, it was always intrigued me, the figures there on Easter Island, but that's probably a story for another evening. But Dr. Little, how are you?
I'm good, but I want to hear the rest of this story of the Easter Island figure carrying off the woman.
Well, I'll send you a copy of the tapestry. I actually used it in one of my horror films. I think it was the skin-eating. What was the name of that film? Skin-eating jungle vampires.
Yes, that's correct.
Something like that. Yeah. All right, but that's on to exploring the bizarre, or more stable topic. So, Dr. Little, how long have you been investigating the Indian mounds and these ancient structures, and how did you get involved in all of this? I know who you are, and of course I've read your articles and stuff, but I don't really know how you got started in all of this. It's been an intriguing career for you.
I have done a lot of different things, and it's kind of a long story. First of all, thank you for having me on. It's always good to just kind of spread the word and listen to other people. Excuse me. I got into this actually in the 1960s when my family moved to Huntsville, Alabama. My father went to work for NASA. I was doing fine till just a minute ago. Maybe there's something going
Earth
on. He
energies.
doesn't want me to talk.
Yes, the Earth energies. Yes.
I don't talk about this early history much or how I got into these things, but I got into UFOs back then, and Of course, I wrote quite a bit about UFOs in the 80s and then in the 90s. And after I completed writing the first UFO book that I wrote, which was a follow-up to Carl Jung's 1959 book, that was in 1983. I finished the book, and then I was looking for a publisher. And I began having out of nowhere, began having a series of dreams. And in the dreams, I was standing on Indian mounds. Now, I didn't even know what an Indian mound was, but I would stand on a mound in this dream, and I'd take a picture. And then I'd be on another mound, and I'd take another picture, and another mound, and take a picture. And this went on all through the night. It was very disturbing for a while. Now, I was running substance abuse and mental health programs within prison systems and where I live in Memphis, Tennessee. Very mainstream. I did a lot of research, published lots in mainstream journals. And this dream that I had, it went on for 10 straight nights. It was very disturbing, disturbed my wife also. And I had no idea what it was about until I woke up on really the morning after the 10th dream. And for some reason that I cannot explain, I decided that I needed to go to a local Indian mound that I'd never been to. I say all the time, and this is very honest, that at the time, everything I knew about Indian mounds I could have written on the back of a postage stamp, which I know you guys know what a postage stamp is, because you're old enough to know.
Well, I still stick them onto envelopes for catalogs. I've been doing it all day.
There you go. But I really didn't know anything about them. I mean, I had a bachelor's, a master's, and a doctorate, and in all my coursework and the anthropology that I took, everything in high school and history, they never talked about Native American Indians, ever. Never talked about any of that history. History began in 1492 as far as school was concerned. So I went to the first mounds, which was in Memphis. There were skeletons on display there. But immediately I just knew that what I had to do was to visit every known mound site in North America. I've since expanded that and started going to ones in Central America. I've been to a lot of places in England. Been to the Merry Maidens.
Well, how did you find them?
Well, at the time it got rather difficult, and because of the way I was working and because of my position, I had a very high-up administrative directorial position, and I was allowed to take off anytime I wanted, and I spent week after week after week, 4 or 5 days a week. I would travel all over the country. I dug into archaeology textbooks, which was something totally new to me. I pulled out old maps. I would go to areas, figure out where these were, and go to them. There was no GPS then, of course, and archaeologists really don't want you to know where a lot of these sites are.
I don't think the archaeologists care to know where they are.
Well, they don't really, and they don't want people to know where they are today. And in a few moments, I'll get to. I know a lot of mainstream archaeologists. I'm friends with quite a few. Some of them cannot do it openly. They believe in a lot of things Maria said a few minutes ago about energies and subtle energies and water sources being very important and rituals that were being done. All that relates. But that's how my interest in mounds started. And it really came out of nowhere. I started this project and I started accumulating thousands and thousands of pictures of Indian mounds. Every archaeologist I've ever talked to said, you guys, meaning my wife and I, have been to more Native American Indian mound sites than any living archaeologist today or any in the past. And the reason is the ones in the past couldn't get to that many, and the ones today don't have any money. They can't afford to do it. We've been very fortunate in that we have been able to take off lots of time and spend lots of money traveling to these sites. And also, the same thing with the so-called search for Atlantis and the Bermuda Triangle. We did all that on our own, was all self-funded, and we've just been very fortunate in a lot of ways. But most people just don't have time to do it. But finding them was not easy. Today it's quite a bit easier, but it took huge amounts of time in libraries. digging through old books, and it just became a deeper and deeper project. And I'll say this. When I started actually writing the encyclopedia, which it took, I didn't begin writing it until around 2004. And in 2007, after I got to about 200 to 300 pages and had like 1,000 sites in it, I just, in my mind, I went, oh my God, this is so much work. I don't really want to finish this thing. I just don't want to finish it. It's too much work, and I'll never make any money from it. I mean, I have other things, other books that I can write that do sell pretty well. And as soon as I made that decision in my mind that I wasn't going to do it, I started having dreams of Native Americans, some of whom I've met over the years, that were very angry with me. And it disturbed my sleep again. They were telling me, you've got to do this. And they said, we are going to come back and bother you until you get this thing done. So I decided then, all right, I'll do it. And then the dream ceased. And I finished that book in 2009, and I updated it this year. Well, last year, 2016.
Well, Greg, let me ask you this. Now, we say Indian burial mounds.
They're not all burial mounds.
Well, okay, that's the point I wanted to make here. Were they? I mean, some of them have unusual shapes to them. Am I correct? I mean,
you're very correct on that.
Oh, see, I know. I don't know that much about it, but I have looked into some of your research and on the subject, because you are the master of the Indian mounds.
Well, that's becoming true in many ways, but North America has the most extensive and complex geometric earthworks found in the world. The most extensive site is a 56-mile-long site that begins in Newark, Ohio, and it extends to Chillicothe, Ohio, a 56-mile line of them. Those are continuous that go that 56 miles long. In Newark, Ohio, there is a gigantic circle. It's flat ground. It's a gigantic circle formed with walls of earth 15 feet high. It encloses 20 acres, and it's attached to a gigantic octagon formed with outer walls of earth that encloses 50 acres. Inside of that octagon are 8 truncated pyramids. That then connects to a circular earthwork that would be called in England a henge that is identical to Avebury. It has an outer wall and an inner moat. The outer wall is 9 feet tall of earth, perfect circle, 9 feet tall, and the moat is 7 to 9 feet deep inside of it. It has one opening. In the very middle, it has a huge bird effigy of an eagle. And that connects to all of these parallel lines of earth. It's an incredible site. America had probably 1 million mounds. Easily 1 million. Now, more than half of those were what you would call relatively small conical burial mounds. Kind of look like the top of an ice cream cone. Those can get huge. Some of those got up to 70 and 80 feet tall, and some of those had literally thousands of skeletal remains in them. A lot of them had hundreds, but a few had literally thousands. The largest mound in America is in Cahokia, Illinois, which is just on the other side of the river, Mississippi River, from St. Louis. It is as tall as a 10-story building. It's 100 feet tall. It's on a base of 14 acres, which is 1 acre larger than the Great Pyramid. To tell you the size of it, back in 1987, 5,000 people got up on the top of it and held a ceremony. At its base, there is down inside of it, there is a huge stone structure that is 75 feet long and some 30 feet high. That has never been.
Now, do the Native Americans? I mean, do they see some significance in this? I mean, do they know what's going on?
Absolutely. A lot of these sites are still used by Native Americans for rituals. Absolutely. In fact, that has caused the National Park Service and state parks that some of these sites are at a world of trouble, because they try to stop them from doing rituals there. I had that happen not all that long ago at a site when we were trying to do something. And we were told, no, you can't do that here. It's illegal. It's against federal law. But Native Americans do.
What isn't against federal law?
Yeah, well, there you go. Well, it's religious.
I mean, this thing here with the disaster in Puerto Rico, they can't land the ships there because of some bogus law. I mean, that you can't bring in ships from other countries or something like that. That's just insane. I mean, no matter where you go, it's the world is insane.
By the way, Puerto Rico has mounds and large complexes of mounds, just like we do here. The Puerto Rican government actually I did work for them back in 1990 for about 8 weeks, and they took me around in a limo. They took me to all these sites around the island where there were Indian mounds. Just amazing. They were in Cuba. They're all over. South America actually has the oldest ones in the world. The oldest mounds in the world are in South America, and they go back to 10,500 years ago.
Now here in Indiana, we have mounds just all over the place. We have several state parks that are actually dedicated to some of the largest ones, but we also have just all kinds of smaller ones that are on private property that people really don't know about, and some of the Native Americans, who trace their ancestry back, like the Miami and some of the others, they say that we may have used them, but we didn't build them.
Well, yeah, that's actually statements that you can find in books from the 1800s and 1700s. They're in the old Smithsonian books too. And that really goes to a culture with amnesia, and that term is not mine. I kind of like it. It was coined by a fellow by the name of Charles Hudson, who was an archaeologist. Hudson and other archaeologists have studied very carefully what happened. And I'll throw a number out just that's going to probably amaze any listeners you have, and probably you guys. When Columbus landed in 1492, which Columbus never set foot in North America. In his 4 trips, he never got to North America. But when Columbus got here, archaeologists really believe that the basic population of the Americas was 57 million people. It was not most people think of it as a vast, unexplored woodland where there was almost nobody here but some hunter-gatherers, very primitive people, but it was not that way at all. The city of Cahokia, which had 120 mounds, they know the minimum population of it was 25,000. It probably had up to 50,000 people, which at the time was bigger than London. No offense, Maria.
Taken.
Yeah, but there were these cities all over. I mean, the Inca Empire, the Incas had an army of 1 million people. There were 17 million people in the population of the Inca alone. I mean, it's the numbers of people that were in the Americas. It's astonishing, and we just don't recognize that. But what happened was this: by the year 1600. So you've got roughly 100 years, from 1500 to 1600, 90 to 95% of the population, the indigenous populations, were dead. They died. And the numbers fell that far. All the old people died. They died of diseases that were carried over primarily by the Spanish. I mean, Cuba, and there's these stories about Cuba and Hispaniola and how literally every man, woman, and child died. So in the Americas, as the Spanish started pushing in the early 1500s, they would literally wipe out through disease, and actually they killed a lot, but they didn't kill 50 million people. But what they did was leave behind these diseases that the Native Americans had virtually no resistance to at all. Things that the Spanish had long had, they'd long had these diseases, but they had some resistance to them. People didn't die of chicken pox, but the Native Americans did. And they died of all sorts of diseases that were carried in. And so what was left were people who were trying to escape the towns and the cities because everybody there was dead. In fact, the explorers that went up and down the Mississippi in 1700 found these large abandoned villages with skeletons everywhere. So the whole village would die off, and then whoever was left, they left because it was seen as an evil place, and they didn't go back. So when the first explorers started finding the mounds, they asked the indigenous people, the few that were there, who built these, and they said, "We don't know. We didn't do it." And that is the amnesia. You can when you destroy a culture that doesn't have things in writing or doesn't have the cloud to store it in, you destroy all that knowledge. And so they just didn't remember anymore. And all this is very well documented, very well known. The ancestors of the Native Americans did build the mounds, but the question then becomes, who exactly were the ancestors of the Native Americans, and when did they come over here? And everything in that has changed since 1997, since a lot of discoveries then, and just recent discoveries have changed that dramatically too.
Well, that was going to be my next question is, I mean, we've got about 3 minutes, unfortunately, till our next break. So any estimation on when these mound builders actually flourished?
Well, the mound builders in North America flourished from roughly 4000 BC up to about the year 1400. In South America, they start right now. The earliest we know that they started is around 8500 BC, or 10,500 years ago. But South America was inhabited. There's no doubt among South American archaeologists it was inhabited at least 50,000 years ago. 50,000 years, and some South American archaeologists have found strong evidence that it goes back as long as 250,000 years.
That's just incredible. I mean, that's way before the last ice age.
Exactly. An article that came out today in Science magazine said that in California, it's very clear evidence there were people there by 130,000 years ago, which they weren't humans as we know them. They actually believe they were either Neanderthal or Denisovan.
And that's the rub, because I know for generations archaeologists are saying that there's no evidence that there was any subspecies of humans occupying the North and South American continents.
And that's actually true in that's what they've written, but there are 10, 12 reports of Neanderthal remains found in the Americas. Archaeologists say, well, they're not Neanderthals, and they've never tested them. And now they can, because the laws preclude testing any Native American remains. And the laws preclude digging into the mounds now. You can't dig. The archaeologists can't even dig into mounds anymore, which is bizarre if you think about it. It's just destroyed their field.
Well, I mean, considering that so many of them over the years have been destroyed by farmers and and the like, so it's unfortunate that nothing further can be done with them. But we're going to have to leave it at that, because we are at the top of the hour break. So when we come back, we will continue our conversation with Dr. Greg Little and Maria Wheatley, and you are listening to Exploring the Bizarre on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. So please stay tuned.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Welcome back to the second hour of Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz, and tonight we are talking with Maria Wheatley and Dr. Greg Little. and there's just so many subjects that I know Tim and myself want to cover. So let's get right back into it. Maria, I wanted to ask you about the elongated skulls of Stonehenge. Now, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I mean, Stonehenge has had many different phases, and in what's called phase one of Stonehenge, it was quite a different monument that had 56 blue stones in a very large circle surrounded by a type of henge. It was a ditch on the inside, a mound, and a ditch on the outside as well. It was very different to the henge that Greg was talking about, or like Avery. So that was phase one. It's called a Neolithic monument. And in that era, the ancients used to make mounds, very long mounds, we call them over here, or long barrows. Some can be very, very large. And one of the largest in the world, actually, certainly in northwest Europe, is located on the Salisbury Plain, which is situated sort of about 5 or so miles from Stonehenge. And it was a gigantic long mound. Some of the long mounds did contain burials, some didn't contain burials. So you have lots of different types of mounds in the UK. And I started to investigate through Dowsing, actually, the different mounds along the Salisbury Plain. And I kept coming to one of the largest, and I investigated through antiquarian reports the type of, interments, the people that were buried in the mounds. And I came across the largest barrow contained just one person as a primary burial, and it was a woman. So I decided to investigate it, and that led me to Cambridge University. And the antiquarians were always describing the long-skulled people. And when I saw her skull at Cambridge University, it was very, very long. Not like the kind of cone heads of Peru, but still the long-skulled people of Europe. And then after a while and much research, I found out that the barrows, the long barrows that surrounded Stonehenge, they were all murder victims in there. So the elongated people at some point of phase one Stonehenge, round about sort of 5,500 years ago, had been murdered. So their story is just kind of emerging through my research.
Now, would you say murdered? I mean, are we talking about like invasion from a neighboring tribe, or sacrifice, or just what are you referring to?
Some of them showed defense wounds, and one was beheaded at Stonehenge. There was one barrow, for example, called Bowles Barrow, which is in the military area, because we must remember Stonehenge is surrounded by military establishment after military establishment, and some areas of the Salisbury Plain you can't have access to. It's just owned, run by the military. So on the military side of the Salisbury Plain, you have Bowles Barrow, and that contained round about sort of 25 males of all different ages, young boys to older men in their prime predominantly, that were all murdered. So it seems that there must have been some clash at some point. And it's interesting to note in the research that I did that the long barrows contained long-skulled people, and then round about 2500 BC, if we use orthodox dating system, the culture changed. It went to creating much more rounder stone circles and round barrows akin to the ones in Ohio, or very similar to those in that part of America. But they only contain skulls of a much round-skulled type of person. So I think there maybe have been a clash between the long-skulled people of the Salisbury Plain and the round-skulled people.
Well, now we see throughout history, all across the planet, the same kind of elongating of skulls, usually by boarding babies. And were the elongated skulls found in that area brought about the same way, or was this a natural circumstance that they were born that way, or does anybody really know?
That's a really good question, and to be truthful, that hasn't been addressed. They look like they are, a long-skulled race. And if you have a look across prehistoric Europe to the French monuments and beyond, in Sardinia and places like that, they do seem to be long-skulled, and Malta was reported to have long-skulled people as well. So it's probably, quite a natural race. But there was evidence from one long barrow on the Salisbury Plain, that said, of boarding, which was recorded by an antiquarian. So it could have been that some people were boarding their heads to look like these people, because not everybody in Neolithic Britain around Stonehenge or Avebury or any of the monuments went into these mounds. And I think that was their secondary use anyway. I think they're much, much older, and they were reused by the Neolithic people 5,500 years ago to place the long skulls and long bones in. I think they actually predate that personally and go back much, much further. But not everybody went into these mounds. There was a lot of flat graves. So it's presumed that the elite went into these mounds, like the equivalent of our royalty or high priests or high priestesses. So they're just a fraction of the much wider community.
Well, yeah, that's always the case, isn't it?
Same old.
That's right. Yeah, nothing. The more things change, the more they stay the same.
There's something very similar. Can I jump in a second?
Oh, yes, please do.
Okay, very similar in America in the Adena era mounds. The Adena mounds are much older, roughly 1000 BC to 2000 BC. They're almost always conical mounds that had a moat around them, and in the base of those mounds was almost always we call it a royal tomb, but the truth is they generally were not the chieftains. They were the priests and the shaman, and those Adena tombs are the source of numerous skeletons that were recovered by the Smithsonian archaeologists. This is mainstream archaeology, that were 7 to 8 feet in height. Enormously tall people, far too tall. They just didn't fit. People at that time averaged 5 feet 4 inches in height. That's known that's what the population measured. But out of these Adena mounds, for example, the Smithsonian found 17 of these 7 foot to 8 foot tall skeletons from Adena mounds, and most of these were found in West Virginia, along the Kanawha River and the Ohio River. So it's something that's very similar to what has been found in England.
Hey, Maria, who was the High Queen?
Well, that was the lady that came out of the largest long mound on the Salisbury Plain. And she could have been a high priestess, high queen. Nobody really knows that. But she was kind of ceremonially placed within that long mound. So I think she must have generated some very, respect. And in the area of her era, we have some of the most intriguing earthworks in England, for example, one of which stood originally in front of Stonehenge, called the Cursors Monument. And to visualize what the Cursors Monument looked like, we imagine some very tall earthworks made of chalk block, going for 1.75 miles long, that stood in front of Stonehenge, with chalk walls probably about between 6 and 10 feet high. And they created these massive Cursors monuments, and one of which in Dorset is 7 miles long. So they created some of the most very sophisticated monuments long before the Henge monument came into being. And Greg was just saying about the height of this queen or priestess with the elongated skull that came from the long mound. She was about 5 feet 4 inches tall. They were quite short. But in my research of looking at antiquarian reports of Stonehenge from a much later mound, which is, we have round barrows that aren't just conical. If you look at a barrow, the ones that are very large, they're called bell barrows over here. They probably contained more males, and the bowl barrows, which are a bit more rounder, contained females. Then we had barrows that go into the ground like pond barrows. And from one of the the later Bronze Age round barrows around Stonehenge came a 13-foot skeleton. So that person was very tall, but that was and there was some very large skeletons found outside of the Salisbury Plain.
Well, that's 13 is 13. I mean, it defies logic almost.
Absolutely, it certainly defied the antiquarian that put it onto the dining room table at the time to measure.
Is it on display somewhere?
No, that there's only an antiquarian report about that skeleton. Where it is, I've not been able to track it down. The height of the other Bronze Age people, that's about from 4,500 years ago, they were just described as very tall or stout by the antiquarians such as Sir Richard Colt-Hoare and many, many others, William Stukely, John Aubrey, who recorded them. And where they are, again, you have to try and track them down. A lot of the skeletons from Stonehenge and Avebury went to either Cambridge or Oxford. But even then, trying to track them down is very difficult.
When you say Stonehenge, how close to Stonehenge were they discovered?
13-foot giant was, according to the antiquarian report, within 2 miles of Stonehenge. The other large people were interned in a place called Woodyates, which is probably about sort of 10, 15 miles outside of Stonehenge.
Mm. Now, we had a fellow here in the States who I think passed away a couple of years ago by the name of Lloyd Pye. And he had done a research on these elongated skulls, and he came to the conclusion, at least the one that he had, was of extraterrestrial origin. And I know they tried to do some DNA testing on it, but I don't know whether before he passed away any of that was ever completed. Has there been any speculation that this elongated skull people may not have been of the Earth?
A lot of people do suggest that they could be aliens. I mean, she looked very human to me, but I've never met an alien to compare with, and I'm very, very open-minded.
Yes.
But across Europe, I think that if you start to do the research, it was a lot of long-skulled people.
Uh-huh. Egypt too, right?
Absolutely. I mean, in Egypt, in Malta, in Sardinia, in France, it was common to have long skulls.
Same in Americas. North and South America, ancient culture, same thing.
Well, now, what is the current thinking by the academic community on this? I mean, is this something they would like to just do away with and not acknowledge, or do they acknowledge that there are these elongated skull people?
When I went to Cambridge, sorry, carry on.
No, go ahead, please.
When I went to Cambridge University, the skulls with the long skulls hadn't been actually seen since the 1930s. Nobody had realised until my research that these people were surrounding Stonehenge. So it was almost like they had been forgotten about.
Now, do you have any photographs of the bones or the skulls, or?
Yes, I took several photographs when I was at Cambridge, and since then I've tracked down quite a few giants as well.
This is amazing stuff. I mean, it's just like, I mean, I don't expect it to be on the front page. Well, it should be in the New York Times. I mean, I don't know if on the front page. Have there been articles written on this in the mainstream press or in archaeological journals, if there are such a thing?
No, I did write several for a prestigious British archaeological magazine, but it got rejected.
Oh, Jesus.
So there's not much support. But that said, when I gave a lecture on the long skull people of Stonehenge, a top archaeologist was in the audience taking notes. So perhaps it will go a bit more mainstream in the future.
He'll take credit for the discovery, no doubt. Now, Dr. Little, you've investigated all this what I would call alternative archaeological discoveries. why is there such an attempt to cover this up by the mainstream? I mean, it's not like we're dealing with aliens or something so foreign or bizarre that it. I mean, would this change our way of living or our thinking, or it's that important to these academic types that they keep the status quo?
It is important to them that they maintain belief systems, and I've written a lot about the underlying belief system and the defense mechanisms that drive skepticism. And they have an inability to really consider that they are wrong about some things.
Do they ever research anything, or do they just sit there writing about it?
I have had contact with most of the big-time skeptics in America. I haven't in England. And some of them have been cordial to me. Others have not been all that cordial, and they don't like things pointed out when they're wrong. Let me give you an example. There is a big-time skeptic who is a professor in Connecticut, very well known, has written a lot of textbooks. And in one of his textbooks, he said the father of the ancient astronaut theory, and the very first person to ever talk about it was in 1961, and his name was Carl Sagan. Now, you know that's not true, that he's the father of it. Sagan did write an article about the ancient astronaut theory, but he's not the father of the theory, and he's not the first person to ever talk about it. I mean, it was discussed in a few books in the late 40s, but loads of books in the early 50s.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
But the archaeologist doesn't like that. He, in his textbook, which is used in virtually all master's students in archaeology in the United States, use that textbook, and they have to use that textbook. But they do not like to shake up the status quo. American archaeology was shaken to its roots in 1997 when the Clovis first theory collapsed, which was the idea that no one was in the Americas until roughly 9,600 BC, when the land bridge between Siberian Asia and Alaska opened up. It's called Beringia, and the very first people came over then. And they colonized the Americas from Canada all the way down to the tip of Tierra del Fuego in South America, and they did that within a few thousand years. That has been the theory that started in the late 1920s that lasted till 1997, and it collapsed. And since then, they have been shown to be wrong again and again and again. And in the 1990s, archaeology was dealt a blow with the passage of the law called NAGPRA, N-A-G-P-R-A, the Native American Grave Repatriation Act, Repatriation and Preservation Act, N-A-G-P-R-A. And it required all museums or any agencies that have ever gotten any government money to send back any skeletal or burial remains or burial artifacts that had been excavated anywhere in the Americas to indigenous tribes for reburial or destruction. The Smithsonian at the time had over 1 million skeletal remains, various pieces of skeletons. And they, as of 2015 is when we contacted them. They had less than 300 remaining, and those 300 all came from South America, and they couldn't find anyone in South America who would take them. But they had sent everything back to the Native American tribes, who either reburied it or burned it, cremated the remains. And so archaeologists are not allowed to dig into mounds unless there is a road or a farmer has accidentally dug into one and they found burial remains. But farmers don't report that. You've already talked about farmers destroying them. My wife's family has loads of land in Missouri, and they farm it. And I can't tell you how many mounds that their families obliterated in probably the couple hundred years that they've owned that land. And all up and down the Mississippi River, there are tens of thousands of these mounds that were obliterated by farming. But you never hear anything about it now because of the illegality of finding any burial remains. So No, archaeology has been shaken sort of to its core, and now there are just major arguments between North and South American archaeologists. Now you have also archaeologists breaking from the mainstream that are claiming that the Clovis culture came from Europe roughly around 12,000 years ago. They were called the Solutreans. They were very tall people. They were centered in France and Spain and parts of Portugal. And the Solutrean culture disappeared around 16,000 BC and then sort of appeared, something like it appeared in North America. There are genetics that have been done that has shaken American archaeology to the core. It's mainly mitochondrial DNA studies that have been done, and it has just shown that everything that they've believed and taught for the past 70 years is wrong. It's not even an incomplete story. It's a wrong story. I mean, at least you could say, well, we never saw the whole story and we believe this and this, but almost everything we've been told is wrong. It's astonishing. It is true that people came from Asia. Most of the Native Americans came from Asia around 10,000 BC. That is absolutely true, but that's just a little piece of the story. It's a remarkable story that probably goes back at least 100,000 years, if not 250,000 years, like the South Americans tell us. And there were probably Neanderthals here, and maybe
there's still a few of them.
Yes, well, a lot of us have Neanderthal DNA.
Yeah.
The thing about the elongated skulls, I knew Mr. Pye.
Yes.
And I saw his skull and talked to him about it. Met him at a conference in London, as a matter of fact, that Andrew Collins was there. And he was conducting mitochondrial DNA testing. And most of this DNA you see in ancient remains is not using nuclear human DNA. It's using bacteria.
We're getting cut off by that pie
Gotcha.
in the sky. So we'll be back in just a few minutes with the last segment of Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most fascinating guests.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Wow. It's not, I thought that was lightning, but I think it's the aliens shooting us with their ray guns, Tim. You know that?
They missed.
They missed, yeah, but one of these nights they're not going to.
Yeah, I start saying we're still here and we're still talking.
Yeah,
Can't shut us up.
And we've revealed at least half the secrets of the universe.
There you go.
But we figure we got to keep a couple of things under our belt because people won't tune in again. If
That's right.
we let it all out.
I try never to let it all out, Tim.
There you go. Well, we have the show has flown by this evening. I swear. I'm glued to my seat here, literally, and with the headphones on and just listening to every word. And I can't wait to go back and hear this in archive because I always miss something, and I figure I got to listen to it at least once, sometimes twice. Sometimes I'll go back, a year later and say, well, I didn't even realize we did a show on that subject. It's like we've just carried. We've done so many shows now. It boggles. I mean, there are some people that have done more shows than we have, but we've covered a lot of topics here, Tim.
That's right. That's right. Well, and I tell you, this night's topic, it's just, I love this kind of stuff, and it's just, I'm always just fascinated.
Yes, you are an ancient man, Tim.
Yes, I am.
There is no doubt.
At least that's what my daughter says. At least.
Well, we have had from live from the UK, Maria Wheatley and Dr. Greg Little, who I want to turn the topic around to UFOs because, of course, as he has pointed out, I am Mr. UFO, and just like he is Mr. Indian Mound. And but I do want to, I was intrigued, and I didn't realize. I mean, I knew you were into UFOs, of course, and written about the subject, but you were one of the earlier pioneers, probably maybe even going back to the time of John Keel, if not before, who entertained the idea that these may not be extraterrestrial craft?
Yeah, I actually had a number of conversations with Keel and tried to fly up. I was at the time flying as a pilot, recreational, but not recreational, as a private pilot, and because he was one too. And so I was going to fly up where he was in New York and take him around, try and get him to come down and stay a couple of weeks in Memphis with me. But he was getting close to the end then and just wasn't doing real well. But yes, I don't believe that the UFO phenomenon or the UFOs seen today are extraterrestrial craft. I think they are, as Keel said, sort of a psychic, it's a combination of psychological things, earth energies fit into it, absolutely, and a number of kind of paranormal things. That's probably the best way to put it. But I don't believe that they are extraterrestrial aliens at all. I still don't. I do believe it's possible that we were visited in very ancient times, which Carl Sagan himself said. Sagan, in fact, said that we had to have been, that we were. There's just statistically it had to have happened. Sagan even said they probably made up to 10,000 visits to Earth in way back in time.
Yet he totally poo-pooed the idea of UFOs.
Well, he didn't believe they were coming now, and that the current UFOs that we're seeing were extraterrestrial craft.
Well, he didn't believe that they were anything. He thought that they were just total objects that were being misconceived, which is certainly is not the case.
That's misidentification theory that somebody sees Venus or whatever. But
that to me, that to me, they say, it's a 3% of UFOs are legitimate. No, I think it's a lot more than that because people can tell. I mean, not every time. I mean, I've even been fooled probably by. Well, I don't know if I've been fooled by Venus, but, okay, you can be fooled. But if people think they saw a UFO, chances are they had some sort of experience.
Yeah, well, they definitely had an experience.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be on the physical plane. I mean, some people go into this kind of altered state, visit the land of Oz, if you want to call it that, and come out of it, believing that they've been encountered by aliens. But that's the kind of thing that intrigues me, though. Why do people that have these experiences come up with pretty much the same stories?
Well, that's a very interesting question. It probably goes into the area of the psychology of it all and the neurochemistry, the brain chemistry that's going on, and I could tell you what I believe about it, but there is virtually no proof. Although the government has been doing research on this for a long time, and when I say the government, I mean they're paying for it. It's being done at many labs around the country. The people are generally given a research contract to study one little thing. A lot of this has to do with plasma energy that is actually they can produce in laboratories. A really good example that I know you're familiar with, the Yakima Indian Reservation.
Oh yes, or Mafu or Brown Mountain or any of these spook-like places.
At Yakima, I went out there in the mid '90s, and I went with Washington State government officials to Toppenish Ridge, and we spent a couple nights there. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't there for that. It's just they got really interested in what I was doing, so they said, "Okay, we'll set this up." And we didn't see anything where the so-called earthquake lights were seen. But I got to talk to some of the local residents, and I took a lot of photos in the daytime, and I'll be darned, a whole bunch of things showed up in those photos that if you'd seen them at night, you would have thought they were UFOs. But here's what happened. People would see these blobs of light, highly energized blobs of light that would float down the mountain, the sides of it, and Toppenish Ridge is this enormous mountain that doesn't have a single tree on it, and it's just covered with earthquake lines, fracture lines everywhere. So these lights would come out of these fracture lines and roll down the mountain, and Native Americans live in small houses at the base of the mountain. Some of them would get out and get close to these lights, and they all reported the same thing. They all had UFO experiences when they got close to these lights. They all saw strange beings. Some of them reported Bigfoot. Some of them reported seeing little people, which is Native American lore. And some of them reported seeing what we would call the Greys. But they all had experiences when they got close to these lights.
The lights do seem to be intelligent. You know, you say now earthquake lights, spook lights, whatever you want to call them. You know, just in Mexico where they had this earthquake a week or so ago, on YouTube there are videos that people have posted of the lights in the sky. Just after the earthquake. And I know, doing my own research, I used to edit a magazine, because I edited 30 magazines in my career, called Front Page Disasters.
Wow.
Well, it only lasted 3 issues because
that's one I didn't know about.
Well, it's hard to display on the newsstand. Where do you put it next to? I mean, it doesn't go next to True Romance. It's not in the sports department. It would get covered up by Playboy, God bless you, Hugh Hefner, and I mean, but I enjoyed doing it because every issue I snuck in some strange story. I did an article on the Bermuda Triangle because if that ain't a damn disaster, I don't know what is, with all those people disappearing, and the brigade. What was it in Australia that marched into the mist and never was seen again? I think about 5,000 soldiers or something like that. And we always found earthquake lights. That was one that I did an article on, and we found reports of them going back to the 1920s in China. And you talk about deaths by disasters and all. I mean, some of the disasters like the earthquake said they took their toll back in those days. They would kill 30 or 40,000, 50,000 people.
Mm.
I mean, it was.
There's one other little story in this, and then I'll be quiet and let Maria get in here. But in New Madrid, Missouri, where the New Madrid earthquake fault was, and the New Madrid earthquake fault took place, in the 1970s, a professor who was the chairman of the physics department at Southeastern Missouri State University, his name was Harley Rutledge.
Oh my goodness! Yes. I'm trying to get a fellow on who has done extensive research on his material. I have a copy of the book here.
I just wrote an article about that. It's on Alternate Perception's website.
I wonder. Maybe that's the article I remember.
I don't know, but I have been there. I have. Yes. My wife is from New Madrid, and I knew a lot of the witnesses. And I was going to that place when Rutledge did his work. But the bottom line is this: Rutledge and his crew saw. These were all professionals. None of them were UFO people. None. He had roughly 50 people that did this research. They were all astronomers, physicists. And he had some geologists. They had top university equipment. By the way, the president of the university who signed off on it, this is going to ring a bell, what name was Dr. Scully, Scully. Can you believe that? That was the real name of
there's
the...
There's another synchronicity, That's my favorite topic.
There you go. But what Rutledge found was that the UFOs they saw, which they reported them all as lights, rounded or globules of light that would sometimes flatten out. They saw roughly 250 of them over the years they did this. And they filmed them, they photographed them, they did all kinds of tests on them. They responded to light, and as I recall, I think it's 32 times, 32 cases, they got an interactive effect of them. And I had a rather a close friend who's actually a relative, who was the Adjutant General of the Missouri National Guard, who knew about, this is in my wife's family, he knew about the flights of the National Guard's jets that were over the area at the time, and he said they didn't know. They were trying to find out what it was, too. They had no idea what it was. But Rutledge said these were intelligent plasmas. At the end of his book, he will explain, in his mind, these are intelligent plasmas that interact with us.
And they're they exist in another dimension, or
they're not
invisible?
exactly interdimensional.
Yeah.
They come into their Earth energies. It goes to ley lines. Everything that Maria discussed fits what the Native Americans believed. There is some sort of an energy and an intelligence in everything. Native Americans believed that. They believed everything was part of spirit.
Well, Maria, over there in the UK, have you had any UFO sightings along these ley lines or these monuments there?
Well, yes, especially the plasma that Greg was just describing, because it's interesting to note in the British Isles that most stone circles and stone rows are sited within 1.5 miles of a fault line. That's a design canon. Now, when we have a look at the Earth currents that often entwine leys or ley lines, I have seen on these Earth currents amber, like a size of a UK soccer ball, you say over there, we say football, so a round soccer ball, come out of these kind of currents close to ancient sites, and they're amber coloured and they come out. And I remember many years ago when I witnessed one with my daughter, who was then 10, I asked it to move slightly to one side, and they are definitely interacting with our consciousness. It moved over, a bit like you were describing earlier with blinking at Warminster with lights. It was
yes.
So I do feel that. And the other interesting thing that I noticed after the experience, because I was told in a dream to go to this place with my daughter to witness this earth light, as we call them in the UK.
Yes.
And after that, it seemed to increase my sense of well-being and intuition. So I think they really can change our consciousness and act as like a guiding force.
And
guys, you're not speechless.
You say, are they? I mean, do you believe that they are of extraterrestrial origin, or some of them are? I mean, are there UFOs coming around some of these ancient sites to draw energy?
That's often been noticed. You know, I remember doing a series with the UFO hunters that came to Stonehenge, and they were linking, vortices or vortexes to sites that had UFO activity. But what's been noticed in this area over the past sort of 5 years, and bear in mind I'm on the edge of the Salisbury Plain, which is, where the military are. We coin it our kind of like Area 51. It's much smaller than your Area 51, but it is still nonetheless run by the military. And there have been eyewitnesses that have seen 2 helicopters escorting what looked like a kind of classical flying saucer shape towards the Salisbury Plain. They weren't chasing this so-called UFO. They were escorting it.
This reminds me of, and I'm never going to be able to pronounce his first name, but I'll just say the lights that are constantly being seen in Norway that have been extensively studied over the years.
Yeah, those are about the best. In fact, Dr. Hynek, I remember seeing him all dressed up in a polar bear outfit or something over there to investigate the lights. They have some actually very tremendous videos of the lights streaking across the heavens, and apparently the local college set up a kind of an observatory with some cameras that were recording all the activity there, and it's really quite spectacular. It kind of puts the Marfo lights way down, on the totem pole of ghost lights when you see these things up in the heavens. Although Brown Mountain Lights too, Joshua P. Ward, of course, he's done all sorts of research on the subject there, and they've been seen for hundreds of years. Some people sell their cars on the highway and the train and blah blah blah. Well, that's not the case because they predate that. But I was down there many years ago, and we happened to have actually interviewed some of the the original witnesses, like from the 1920s and the 30s and so forth. And they all told the same story about how they'd see this light not too far away. But then as they tried to walk towards it, it would disappear and they would turn around and it would be behind them. So, they didn't see any faces in the lights. There were no, alien creatures per se. Although we did have the story of Ralph Lale, this fellow who ran a little convenience store, I guess you would call it, up on top of the mountain. He would sell you crystals along with a bottle of soda pop, and he had a little man under the counter. In fact, I know I took a photograph of it, which Joshua has put on his page, but credited to Commander X. But that's okay. And it was a little man inside a coffin, and he swears it was an alien. I think it was just one of these roadside attractions that people used to have around to draw people into their place. But he claimed that he actually went inside the mountain and had conversations with these people from some planet I can't remember the name of, but it was very, very silly sounding name. But then perhaps Earth is silly sounding to somebody from the other side of the solar system as well, right?
Tim, you know that in where I grew up, there was the Mound State Park in Anderson, Indiana, which had some, still does, fairly extensive earthworks, ancient earthworks, and that area has been well known through the years as being kind of like a UFO hotspot, sightings of big birds, the little people, pukujis, along the banks of the White River that flows through that park. So it's just interesting how these types of unusual activities seem to center upon these areas. Like which came first? Did the mounds come first and attract the activity, or did they build these places on hotspot areas?
Well, you notice we have just gotten the signal that it's 5 minutes to midnight here on the East Coast, and I do want to go around the table at least one last time so that our guests can tell us how listeners might be able to get in touch with them and what they are working on currently and what they might be working on in the future. So why don't we start over there in the UK with Maria? What's on your schedule?
Well, people can find out what I'm doing on my website, the aveburyexperience.co.uk, or find out about my dowsing courses and my other esoteric courses that I teach online and through Skype on esotericcollege.com. And currently I'm doing planning tours for next year. I go to places not just like Stonehenge, but Malta. I'm going to Sardinia with Hugh Newman. I'm investigating the Bosnian pyramids with Dr. Sam on a cruise in April. So lots of things going on there. I'm about to write a book on Stonehenge, and Dolores Cannon's American publishing company, Ozark, are publishing a book on my Celtic Druid astrology system, which will be out in January in the States.
You are one busy lady. And I've got to catch up on some of your material when I have a chance to catch up on it these days. But most interesting information, indeed, and we will have to have you back on in the future because I'm sure there are a lot of things we haven't discussed. And Dr. Greg Little, what can I say about you? What could you say about yourself? What are you working on these days?
Well, I'm always working on something, but apmagazine.info.
Yes.
Brent Rains edits.
Our good friend and frequent guest. Yeah.
Brent's a good guy. Known him for a long time, and if I write in this field, it'll appear there usually first. apmagazine.info. I am hard to get a hold of. You got to search around a little bit. And I am still very active in my professional field and travel a great deal, but I don't generally talk too much about it. I just finished a book on Alabama mounds with mainstream archaeologists there, working with actually three of the biggest archaeologists in that state. And they've asked me to do another one with them. I don't know that I want to, because those things don't. I don't really like writing with mainstream archaeologists. Otherwise, I'm working on a book with Andrew Collins. He's coming over here this coming week, as a matter of fact, and we're going to spend a couple of weeks together. We're doing a follow-up book to the last one that we did together called Path of Souls, and I'm doing other things.
All right.
Lots of professional work.
Well, you do a great deal of research, and we've got to get back to you to talk about the Bermuda Triangle and Atlantis.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Hey, we found 31 planes.
You found 31 planes.
My wife and I, in our trips there, found 31 planes. But
now, are any of these the Avenger bombers?
No, I was hoping to find them. We found 2 that are on the official list, including one of the very important ones, the second plane that went down. We found that with National Geographic. You can see that on actually, I think it's on YouTube. It's a show Nat Geo did.
Well, I want to also, I guess, put in a plug for a couple of our titles. We have just published a book by Reverend Barry Downing, whose, of course, his original book, Flying Saucers in the Bible, was published 50 years ago. And we've just come out with his second book called Biblical UFO Revelations. Did Extraterrestrial Powers Cause Ancient Miracles, like the parting of the Red Sea, the dropping of manna from the heavens, Ezekiel's wheel, and of course, don't forget about the matrix control system of Philip K. Dick and the paranormal synchronicities of Timothy Beckley, and the Blade Runner 2049 or whatever it's called. That should be out in a couple of weeks. And thank you all for listening, and tune in next week. And don't forget our YouTube channel, Mr. UFO's Secret Files. And thank you, Tina, Peter, Carol, and all of you.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.